The one thing that the establishment hated more than anything is that Ron, the real one, smoked all of their phoniness out of the bushes.
Explain why you voted for No Child Left Behind, Medicare Part D, and 5 debt ceiling increases. What's limited government about that? What's limited government about that, sir?
Is there anything more damning than Rick Big Government Santorum waving the white flag and saying, "You got me, I'm a fake, you should support the real thing"? And it wasn't just the so-called fiscal conservatives that Ron exposed. It was also the war evangelicals and their bought and paid for leadership.
The evangelicals want a role model. Here's a guy married to the same woman for 55 years. But what did they do? In South Carolina, they went out to support the well-known philanderer Newt Gingrich.
The behavior of the evangelical leaders toward Ron Paul was frankly embarrassing, shameful. Not just their support for the endless foreign wars that got hundreds of their church members killed, but their support for politicians like Newt Gingrich and Mike Huckabee when there was a better alternative. I mean, what kind of message does that send?
Ron not only exposed the fake movement that is conservatism, but it's fake media which exists to perpetuate the war hawk establishment.
In Ron, you had all that conservatives claim to be for. Never voted for a tax increase, never voted for an unbalanced budget, constantly fought government expansion, and they despised him. Some of them said, if he does become the nominee, we're voting for Obama. If that didn't expose them for the cynical racket they are, what could?
Conservatives' preference for Obama over Ron Paul was no surprise. The conservative movement formed by Bill Buckley came out of the Truman National Security State created in 1947. That's why conservatives posing as champions of small government is the biggest farce ever.
The president leads Texas Congressman Ron Paul by 1 point, so also a virtual dead heat there.
No one is saying that Ron would have automatically won the presidency, but he was more competitive than they let on.
Ron's great and lasting contribution was exposing the Fed as servants of the big banks rather than the public. The Fed was created in 1913 to end all panics and recessions, or so the public was told. What the Fed gave us instead was the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in U.S. history.
The Fed was created due to a misunderstanding of what causes business cycles. It was believed that a free market economy could not be stable without a government agency to manage it. But in fact, the reverse is true. The Fed has led to more instability, more economic problems, rather than fewer.
Since the Depression, the Fed has increasingly replaced genuine economic prosperity with inflationary booms and bubbles in stocks, bonds, and real estate. It has also made busts and recessions much longer. Fed policies of creating bank reserves out of thin air and suppressing interest rates has thwarted economic recoveries for years, as we saw in the Great Recession.
Through most of its history, the Fed has been regarded as a neutral, non-political, technocratic organization with an important job in running the monetary system and smoothing out economic fluctuations. Thanks to Ron Paul and others, the Fed is now regarded properly as a political entity, as a political organization that serves the interests of the politicians in power, just like any other government agency.
In today's mainstream business media, you see articles analyzing Fed policy, some very critical. Before Ron's presidential campaigns, the Fed was usually glorified as an inflation fighter, which is laughable. Today, the Fed is treated with much greater skepticism and now recognized not only as a source of inflation, but bubbles and crashes as well.
You know, I'm not a big fan of the Fed, you know that. I think they make a lot of mistakes.
Do we really think the way to improve the quality of life for Americans is to just print more money from the Fed?
The Fed has been perceived within the business press as being very academic and very technical and not at all political. But in fact, this is just matters of style rather than substance. In substance, the Fed is a central planning agency, and it works about as well as every other government central planning agency in history. One of my most amazing recent experiences was attending a Ron Paul campaign rally and hearing hundreds of college students chanting, "End the Fed, end the Fed." You couldn't imagine something like that 20 years ago when students had no idea what the Fed was. And if they did, they had studied it in class and been told, well, the Fed is what gives us economic prosperity.
One of my favorite memories about Dr. Paul was just how relaxed he was before the presidential debates. I remember one in particular in 2012 held by CNN. An hour or two before the event, we were just at his condo outside of Washington, D.C., and he was making some soup in the microwave, totally relaxed, not worrying about what he was going to say or or how to prepare. And I guarantee you at the same time, the other participants in this debate, like Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney, had been huddling for days in some expensive DC hotel suite, preparing every possible sentence and every possible statement and working with focus groups and primping their hair and thinking about what necktie to wear. And Ron was totally relaxed and nothing like this because his message was always the same. He believed he would say the same thing to every group, and he never worried about how he would answer or respond to particular questions. He just wanted to be honest and give what he saw as the message of liberty to any question, whether that was in a debate or whether that was posed by a school kid visiting him in his congressional office. Since I first met him in 1988 when I was a young college student, he's been one of the greatest bosses, mentors, and friends I've ever had.